Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be discussing the insane potential of the Sentinel League. So if you're looking to get a bit of a head start on everyone else and know exactly how to use Sentinel and what the possibilities are when the league starts, this is the video for you. But first, if you like the video and you like the content from the Grim, make sure to subscribe to the channel and chuck the video a like, it really helps out. But without further ado, let's get into the theory crafting. Sentinel is a fairly complex mechanic, so first things first, let's cover exactly how it works. In the new league, enemies and Sentinel caches we encounter will drop Sentinels with varying effects, rarity, and mods, getting better as we progress through the story and the Atlas. Up to 3 different Sentinels can be equipped at a time, one of each type: blue, red, and yellow. So while you have a Sentinel equipped, you can activate each one of them once per zone. So 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 yellow, giving you a total of 3 Sentinel activations per zone baseline. So this is going to be a little similar to how you throw a flare or a dynamite in Delve. While a Sentinel is active, it'll follow you around, targeting enemies and empowering them up to the amount of empowerment charges they have, making them harder but also more rewarding. Much more on this later on. Sentinels are only active for a set duration and have a limit on how many enemies they can empower at once, so using them at the right time will be very important. Each Sentinel is different, and it's important to understand what makes a Sentinel good, bad, and valuable in certain situations, as well as when to activate them. So there's 4 critical stats to understand when deciding if a Sentinel is worth using. First up, and most importantly, number of empowerments. This dictates how many enemies your Sentinel can empower per activation in a map before it is no longer able to do more. By far the most important stat and the main multiplier on how much loot you're going to be getting from your Sentinel mechanics in the map. Basically, all mechanics stem from empowering enemies, so the more of them you can empower per map, the better. Next up, duration. Essentially, how long the Sentinel is active for. All this stat does is essentially give you more leeway and more time to empower all the enemies that the Sentinel is capable for. Extending this past a certain point won't do much, but it will make things more comfortable and afford you a few more options and flexibility when deploying your Sentinels. Third on the list here, empowerment. Essentially, the degree of difficulty and reward multipliers you're applying to the enemies. Higher numbers equals higher loot. Finally, remaining power. This number is essentially equal to the remaining amount of times a Sentinel can be used. If you have 10 out of 10, it means you can use the Sentinel 10 more times. If you've got 1 out of 10, it means you only have 1 activation left. Now that we understand what we're looking for, it should be pretty obvious that all Sentinels were not created equally, with the 2 on screen being a pretty perfect example, having vastly different stats and efficacies. The last thing to understand is how each of the colored Sentinels is different and what scenario you'll want to use them in. First up, Stalker Sentinels, the red ones. These Sentinels have fairly weak targeting options and aren't going to be able to instantly empower all monsters around you, but as a result they have a high duration and also have reasonable other stats. The best way to use these will most likely be to pop them at the start of a map when you have enemies on the screen and not think twice about it and let it go on its very merry way with its high duration. Next up, Apex Sentinels, the yellow ones. These are special. They can only empower rare or unique enemies, and they have a very low empowerment amount. They generally have higher effects and are much more potent, but require you to have multiple rare enemies within your vicinity and ones that you can get to within its duration. A very powerful strategy with this one will be popping it where tons of rare monsters are present, in for example a Legion, or with Beyond active on the map, or perhaps even using it on a unique boss or a map with multiple unique bosses in its zone. Lastly, the Pandemonium Sentinel, the blue one. This one trades duration for the implicit modifier that allows it to hit multiple enemies at once with its attacks. It's essentially a Stalker Sentinel with far more powerful targeting but a much lower duration. You'll notice that this one is going to be far more powerful at targeting a full, for example, Legion or all the monsters in a Blight or an Expedition, and that's where you most likely want to be using this one. You don't want to be popping it at the start of the map, but you do want to be popping it in a large clump of enemies. To summarize, pop the Stalker Sentinel whenever you can, whenever you encounter monsters. Apex Sentinels should be used in rare, dense areas or on the boss, especially if there's multiple unique bosses. And lastly, Pandemonium Sentinels should be used on strong boxes, breaches, legions, or any concentration of monsters. Alright guys, now that we understand the mechanic, let's dive into the most important part, the rewards. What are we getting from the Sentinel League? Is it worth it? And how can we maximize it? And what's it looking like? Well, overall, the Sentinel rewards we've been shown so far look very, very enticing. Let's start off at the ground floor and work our way up. So at its most basic, we are offered the risk reward of the Sentinel League. So as we've talked about already, each Sentinel empowers a number of enemies, and empowering those enemies is going to make them harder, but also allow them to yield more loot. How's it doing that? Well, it's increasing their rarity and their quantity, similar to how the Scourge debuff worked in the Scourge League. And if anyone remembers Scourge, it was an absolute haven for magic finders, group play players, and everyone involved. Amplifying the amount of loot you're getting from these monsters you're choosing to empower Sentinel is incredibly powerful, and I imagine there's going to be a full metagame around people gearing up their Sentinels and rolling in with the MF gear and trying to get some really juicy stuff. Now, the way it worked in Scourge is that the quantity that you were applying to monsters was a more multiplier. So if it works the same in Sentinel, I imagine there's going to be plenty of strategies around, for example, stacking stacking reliquary scarabs, stacking quantity and rarity on your gear, having insanely rolled gear, using the new map atlas keystones, and then maybe even trying to get possessed bosses, and then popping a Apex Sentinel on top of that. It's just going to be completely out of control, and you may even get situations in which all of the items that a mob is dropping is unique or something along those lines. I imagine there is quite a lot of crazy stuff that will happen using the empowerment system, and it's also something that you can scale based on that empowerment value. So 52, maybe you can get to 100, who knows? Another catch is that Chris Wilson went on to say in the Q&A that multiple players can all activate their Sentinels each per map. So you could, for example, have 6 players in a map with maximum juice and pretty much empower a good chunk or the vast majority of monsters in that map. I imagine we're going to be seeing some absolutely disgusting compilations of people getting ridiculous loot with all of their Sentinels empowering everything. Very, very cool, very awesome, and it stacks with so many things already in the game. So that's just one angle you can go at. The quantity, rarity, magic find angle. The angle that most interests me, and I'm sure it's going to be most lucrative for a lot of other people, is actually the modifier angle. So you can see here that this Sentinel here has a modifier on it which says 0.3% chance for empowered enemies to have a currency reward. So these rewards are similar to how Legion monsters have little icons on their head, and when you slay them you get rewards. So by empowering enemies you have a base chance, as Chris has said in the actual reveal, to have enemies have a random modifier applied to them, but having mods on your Sentinels guarantees that. So you have a 0.3% chance here in this scenario. However, in the actual reveal we have here, you'll notice that you have much higher percentages on some of these higher tier Sentinels that are being shown off. So in the trailer here, 2.1% chance for empowered enemies to have a unique reward. And I believe a Sentinel down here actually has 4.6% chance for enemies empowered to have a currency reward. That's pretty crazy. So for each enemy you empower with the Sentinel, they have a 4.6% chance of becoming empowered and dropping currency, which is quite nice, of course. Now they do actually show off in the trailer that this goes up up to roughly 5% as a tier 1 modifier, and you can actually, so far from what we've seen, have a Sentinel that empowers 100 enemies in one map. That's pretty crazy. So if you just do the math on that right now, you have 100 enemies times a 5% chance, napkin math, you're empowering, you're getting 5 currency rewards per map. So that's kind of like pretty damn good. That's kind of akin to like half a delirium mob, half a currency delirium mob already just off of this one Sentinel, which is pretty damn impressive if you ask me. There's definitely potential there, and you're getting, in addition to that, all of the quantity and juiciness and nice stuff there as well, which is pretty damn awesome. Now, of course, you get these for a set amount of maps, as we discussed. So you can see here, this Sentinel here will last 10 maps. So 10 times 5, that's 50 currency rewards over the span of those 10 maps, as long as you're getting maximum value out of those empowerments, if you had a really, really nice Sentinel rolled with pretty good mods. And that's just one affix. You can see here that there's also other affixes that can appear on these Sentinels, like this one, 27% chance for rewards to be doubled. We actually just have no idea what that means. We don't know. We can't fully understand how that's actually working. It could double the loot from the mob, or it could double the chance that it's getting the currency reward. We actually don't know. However, I will say that Sentinels are usable everywhere but pinnacle bosses, the simulacrum, and unique maps, meaning they can be used in stuff like logbooks, they can be used on expedition mobs, they can be used on legions, in Blight. All these places can take advantage of the quantity and all of these different modifiers that you've got going on these Sentinels. Picture a world in which you take your yellow Sentinel the Apex Sentinel, into a logbook, and you empower the unique boss of that logbook that you get with an Apex Sentinel, and it drops significantly more coins and all sorts of things like that. The opportunities are truly mind-boggling. Now, it doesn't stop there. Of course, currency is great, existing rewards are great, we all love that. But there is also a new type of reward entering the fray with Sentinel, the Recombinators. These are perhaps some of the most powerful crafting items the game has ever seen. I'm not going to get into the details here, but it's fair to say these are probably going to cost anywhere between 50C all the way up to 2 or 3 exalts. Somewhere in that ballpark is where I would guesstimate, and these things are absolutely ridiculous. So getting these from the Sentinel mechanic already gives you massive incentive to engage with the thing, with the mechanic, and try and min-max it and really get the most out of it. Getting access to Recombinators, having them, selling them, using them is going to be a big part of this league, and you're going to be able to create some of the most powerful items ever, so it's well worth your time investing and looking into Sentinel and understanding how it works, on top of all of the cool reward interactions we've already talked about. Very, very cool in my opinion. Finally, we'll touch on unique Sentinels here. These will be an alternate way to play the game, similar to how Scourged maps probably were. You can pick up Sentinels and do almost like special kind of like prophecy style quest with them to try and extract some rewards out of these unique Sentinels. We've only seen one which has monetary gain right now, and that is the Angel of Vengeance, but it does have some pretty interesting interactions here. So you'll notice that here that it says empowered monsters drop 18 currency rewards, and in theory you should be able to activate it 5 times. So over the course of 5 maps, you'll get 5 times 18 currency rewards. But it also has a little caveat here. Map item quantity affects number of rewards from empowered enemies. So basically, the more you roll a map, if you roll 100% quantity, for example, now you won't be getting 18, you'll be getting 36. And of course, if you corrupt maps, chisel them, alchem to crazy amounts, even potentially using the top Atlas small passives to increase the effective modifiers, you can start to amp this up to crazy levels. And even taking advantage of Eldritch altars, this potentially could also influence it, as that does apply to the map itself. You know, it can get pretty crazy, and I think that we could see some specific strategies around these unique Sentinels as well. They do seem quite impressive, and there may be some metagame around that. So the rewards are extensive, and there's also a massive degree of flexibility with how you create, gear, and approach your Sentinel strategy, which we'll get into next. Alright guys, so the rewards are looking pretty good, but let's get into the heart of Sentinel, the most exciting part of it, the extensive customization of the league itself. I haven't seen flexibility and customization and depth since the Synthesis League. It is absolutely crazy and I am salivating at the prospects. Let's cover it. So you have full control over the creation and crafting of the Sentinels you're using, and we've already been over just how important each of the different stats and how powerful some of the different modifiers are on the Sentinels themselves. There are a ton of different base types as well as a ton of exclusive modifiers you can gain access to through a unique crafting system that we can see in the background here. So what is this crafting system? Well, after you've depleted your Sentinels and you've used up all of their charges and they are without any use, you can feed them into the Sentinel assembler here, as long as you have a prerequisite material called the power core. Now these power cores will drop from the Sentinel mechanic themselves. I assume they'll also drop from the Sentinel caches we spoke about at the start of the video, and it's basically just going to be a requisite for creating a new Sentinel. Now once you have two Sentinels of the same type, so you got two yellow ones here and a power core, you can combine them into a brand new Sentinel. It seems to always be more powerful as well. So Chris went on to explain in the Q&A that this resulting Sentinel will essentially always have modifiers from both of the donor Sentinels. It'll also share its base type with one or the other one of it. So for example, if you have two of the same base and you combine them, you'll pretty much always get that same base, with one exception, and that is in the result of a mutation. So a mutation is essentially a random occurrence. You could get a brand new modifier or you could get a brand new Sentinel base, and the most powerful modifiers and the most powerful Sentinel bases will be these mutations. So for example, we saw in the video that you can get a Sentinel with a duration of 100 and empowers 100 enemies and also has 12 charges. That's significantly better than the base Sentinels. Now what's cool about this system is you have a lot of control over what's happening and the Sentinel you're creating. For example, let's say that you created those two of the Sentinels with really good base type through other combinations. If you then combined them again, it's most likely that you would get again another really good Sentinel to use. So essentially you're going to want to cherry pick the best bases and the best modifiers and combine them and create even more powerful Sentinels, and then take those Sentinels after you've depleted them and used them, and then combine them further with some other depleted Sentinels you've created to create even more powerful Sentinels, essentially creating a sort of kind of Sentinel breeding program, if you will. And we'll explain how this is all going to play out soon. But it doesn't stop there. You have even more agency over how you're creating the Sentinels. So of course, we just talked about base types, which is obviously going to be a really, really important one here. So you can see here, we have different types of power cores. We have the base power core, which is essentially going to allow you to combine them, but we also have exclusive power cores, which have unique effects and influence the outcome of what you might get here. So we've got here the first one, the transforming power core. It's essentially going to give you a higher chance of combining into a mutated base type, which will be much more powerful. The next one here is going to give you a higher chance of having a higher tier mod. So picture a world in which you had two Sentinels and they gave like really low chance of getting a currency reward on enemies when you empower them. Well, you could take those two Sentinels, you could put them into the combiner and put it in an amplifying power core, and you'd have a pretty damn good chance of getting a much higher tier of that currency reward, potentially giving you a very lucrative Sentinel indeed. And then take that Sentinel after you've used it and combine it again, and you can kind of see how you would get this really, really crazy system in which you could get a ton of value. Next up, the augmenting power core. This one seems to be what you would use your trash Sentinels for. So if you essentially got a two bad Sentinels, you could kind of put them together and you could get a Sentinel with a new set of modifiers, essentially scramble them instead of upgrading them, because you're going to get a bunch of Sentinels which aren't that great. This will be a good way to dispose of those, because you're not going to want to use every Sentinel that drops, I imagine. You're only going to want to use the ones which are worthwhile. So overall, very, very exciting coming, and I fully expect to take advantage of this. How exactly? Let's get into the details. So overall, I imagine you're going to be dropping Sentinels on a similar rate as you would acquire, for example, contracts. They drop from caches and enemies similar to that, so if you've got higher quantity and you're also running a ton of maps, you're probably going to get more than you can use overall. So you're probably going to end up with an excess of them, meaning you have the option to pick and choose which Sentinels you want to use at any given time. Now, what I'm personally going to do is collect all my Sentinels in a bunch of tabs, and I'm going to search through looking for the best modifiers that I know that I want to use. I'm subsequently going to run those Sentinels in my maps, and then after they're done, I'll further put them over into another tab and then combine them as I see fit. Any Sentinel which isn't worth my time running, I'm probably going to trade either to the vendor if I can 3-to-1 them, or I'm going to combine them using this power core here to try and get a different alternative Sentinel with different modifiers, or a unique Sentinel. And overall, you shouldn't be spending too much time doing this. It shouldn't be too micromanagey. If you get a good regex to type in, similar to how people do the expedition vendors, you'll most likely be able to pick out all the good Sentinels, churn through them, combine them up, churn through those, combine them up again, and then you'll eventually start ending up with some really, really good Sentinels. Overall, I think it'll be quite a lot of fun and shouldn't be too difficult. Lastly, on the customization front, you have, of course, the Sentinel control panel here. Now, we've only seen a few of the modifiers from this, some of which are as follows. Pandemonium Sentinels have 20% increased chaining range, which is okay. 10% chance for power cores found to be doubled, which could be pretty good. Probably going to be doing a lot of combining. And Stalker Sentinels have a 10% chance to not consume a charge on use, which could be quite nice to preserve some of the more powerful Sentinels you're using and reduce the amount of micromanagement. Lastly, on the small nodes here, we have Apex Sentinels grant 10% increased rewards. Again, we don't know what that means, but it could be pretty good. And there's also larger, more notable nodes here on the tree, two of which were shown. First of all, Pandemonium Sentinels can be used an additional time. So this will take your total Sentinel uses from 3 in a map to 4, which is quite the increase, but will also increase the amount of power you're consuming on your Pandemonium Sentinels. So overall, it's going to be a bit of a trade-off, but it should probably be worth picking up, and going from 3 to 4 will be quite nice, but you will churn through twice the amount of blue Sentinels. Lastly here, we have Stalker Sentinels do not empower normal rarity enemies, which is incredibly powerful and will most likely be picked up by everybody, honestly, as it will be a massive more multiplier on those enemies for the purpose of Magic Find. If you're going for the Magic Find route, this will definitely be something you're going to be looking into, as normal monsters aren't very good. They don't drop much loot, so multiplying their loot isn't going to be very good, but multiplying better monsters is certainly going to be better. So overall, tons of customization, the opportunity to breed Sentinels, very enticing rewards. All they need to nail is the execution and maps, as long as it's not clunky and doesn't slow you down. And overall, as long as you get enough Sentinels that you can pick and choose the ones you want to run without having to micromanage them, it will probably be an absolute blast. And I cannot wait to get my teeth stuck in to all of the possibilities. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.